The sniper exhaled slowly, his finger tightening on the trigger. The black-tipped .308 caliber round roared from the barrel, piercing the air with a sharp crack. The projectile struck true, tearing through the scaled forehead of the Thraxian soldier who had been pointing toward his position. The alien crumpled to the ground, its weapon clattering uselessly beside it. Before the sniper could adjust his scope, a deafening metallic groan filled the air. His view was abruptly obstructed by what he initially thought was a wall. A vast, impenetrable barrier that descended with crushing force, flattening the body of his target into the pavement. He jerked his head up from the scope, his heart pounding as he realized the truth. It wasn't a wall. It was a leg. One of 3 massive, mechanized limbs belonging to a colossal war machine that loomed over the battlefield like a god of destruction. The sheer size of the machine was staggering. Its joints, forged from Thraxian alloy, groaned under its immense weight as hydraulic systems hissed and vented steam into the air. The leg alone dwarfed the nearby vehicles, casting a shadow so deep it seemed to swallow the light itself. The sniper's breath caught in his throat as the machine's torso swiveled with a grinding of gears and servos. Its chest plate bore the scarred insignia of the Thraxian invasion force, the emblem worn and scorched from atmospheric entry. Through his scope, the sniper could make out the intricate details of its design. Angular armor plates overlapping like the scales of some monstrous beast, steam venting from its joints, and the scorch marks of previous battles etched into its hull. Its right arm housed a plasma cannon, the weapon crackling with contained energy that cast an eerie blue glow across the battlefield. The barrel alone was wider than a man, capable of reducing entire buildings to ash in an instant. The left arm projected an energy shield that pulsed with small bursts of blue light, deflecting incoming fire with ease. The machine's head turned with mechanical precision, its red sensor arrays glowing through armored slits as it scanned the area. It locked onto the sniper's position with unnerving accuracy, its external speakers booming in a distorted Thraxian dialect that made the ground tremble. Target acquired. The plasma cannon swung toward the sniper, the weapon's focusing rings spinning up with a high-pitched whine. Blue lightning arced between the rings as the cannon charged, the air around it crackling with energy. The sniper didn't hesitate. He yanked back from his rifle, abandoning his position just as the cannon fired. The tipped-over bus he had been using as cover erupted in a blinding flash of superheated plasma, the explosion raining molten debris onto the street below. The heat seared his back as he dove for cover, his ears ringing from the blast. "They brought a fucking mech!" he shouted into his radio, his voice crackling with static. He scrambled toward another abandoned bus, ducking low as plasma bolts from Thraxian soldiers sizzled through the air around him. Their shots left scorched holes in the vehicle's rusted metal frame, the acrid smell of burning metal filling his nostrils. Yanking open one of the sliding doors, he threw himself inside the bus, glass crunching beneath his boots. Through a spider-webbed window, he spotted the advancing Thraxian soldiers, their armor glinting in the fires of the burning city. He pulled back the rifle's bolt, ejecting the spent casing with a metallic clink, and slid a fresh round into the chamber. Taking a deep breath, he forced his racing heart to slow. The chaotic view through his scope gradually steadied into a familiar figure-8 pattern. At the bottom of his exhale, time seemed to freeze. His finger squeezed the trigger. The round punched through the fractured window with a sharp crack, then tore through the sedan one of the Thraxians was using for cover. A spray of blue mist confirmed his shot as the alien soldier toppled forward, slumping lifelessly over the car's hood. "Understood, Ramirez. Team, fall back now. SWAT 1. Get the hell out of there." Sergeant Adams' voice barked over the radio, cutting through the chaos. The molten mass from the plasma cannon's earlier shot still glowed red, the heat radiating even from several yards away. Adams stared at the destruction, his mind racing. Just one shot did that, he thought. Fuck, fuck, fuck. F. "Sarge, I'm here." A familiar voice snapped him out of his thoughts. The medic, marked by the red cross on his arm, placed a hand on Adams' shoulder, the sudden touch jolting him back to reality. "The lieutenant's stable. Where are the civilians?" the medic asked. scanning the area until he spotted a person sprawled on the concrete next to a crouched figure. As he pivoted and began to step forward, something yanked at his sleeve. "That one's dead. Where's SWAT 1 Williams?" Adams questioned anxiously. More shots echoed as his squad emerged from the CTC building, bullets and energy blasts crisscrossing through the air in a deadly exchange. "Sarge, how do we kill that fucking thing?" The bearded SWAT officer shouted from behind a concrete pillar near the CTC building. He discarded an empty magazine from his 416 Hong Kong dollars and released the bolt, firing several more shots at the advancing Thraxian soldiers and dropping 2 more of them. The breacher rushed past him and moved toward Sergeant Adams. The mech's hydraulics whirred as its massive frame pivoted. The plasma cannon's focusing rings spun up with an otherworldly hum, building to a crescendo that made teeth rattle. Blue energy crackled along the barrel, casting strange shadows across the battlefield. "Get down!" Adams screamed, but the warning came too late. A blinding flash erupted from the cannon's maw. The plasma bolt struck with devastating force, vaporizing the pillar, the bearded officer, and a massive section of the CTC building's facade in an instant. The explosion sent a shockwave that knocked Adams off his feet. Concrete and steel rained down as smoke billowed from the gaping hole left in the building's side. Where the bearded officer had stood moments before, only a blackened crater remained. The edges of the hole in the building still glowed orange, molten debris dripping onto the street below. The acrid stench of ozone and burning materials filled the air. Adams stared at the destruction, his ears ringing from the blast. The image of the officer, there 1 second, gone the next, burned into his mind. His hands trembled as he gripped his rifle tighter. "Holy shit," the medic whispered, pressing himself flat against what remained of their cover. "That thing just—" The mech's servos whined as it realigned its cannon, preparing for another shot. Its red sensor arrays swept across the battlefield, searching for new targets among the chaos and destruction. Sergeant Adams remained frozen in disbelief. His thoughts surged and crashed into one another like a massive pileup on an 80 miles per hour freeway. He lacked any preparation for this. After 5 years as a beat cop and a college graduate before that, he wasn't a seasoned veteran, and the weight of that truth began to fracture his mind. That's when the breacher shoved past the sergeant, nearly knocking him down. He was sprinting directly toward a small minivan that still had its lights on, indicating the keys were still in the ignition. Likely the van the 2 fighters had arrived in. He quickly lifted the hood and placed several blocks of explosives around the engine block and on top of the hood itself. His eyes were focused and calculating. "What are yo?" Adams was cut off by the breacher's voice over the radio. "I'm stealing the playbook from a few guys in Afghanistan, Sarge. Cover me." Adams snapped back to reality, raising his rifle and laying down suppressing fire. The rest of the team followed suit, their weapons blazing at the Thraxian soldiers. The coordinated barrage forced the aliens to duck behind cover, buying the breacher precious seconds. A plasma bolt streaked through the air, catching an officer in the chest. The officer's tactical vest melted instantly, his body crumpling to the ground with a sickening thud. The acrid smell of burned flesh and Kevlar filled the air. Adams was now down to 4. The mech's cannon hummed to life again, targeting their position. Adams dove behind a concrete barrier as the plasma bolt obliterated the spot he'd occupied seconds before. The near miss left his skin tingling from the heat. "Almost done," the breacher called out, his hands moving with practiced efficiency as he connected the final detonator wires. He slammed the hood shut and jumped into the driver's seat. The minivan's engine roared to life. Tires squealed against pavement as the breacher floored the accelerator, steering straight for the mechanical behemoth. The mech sensors tracked the approaching vehicle, its weapon systems adjusting to acquire the new threat. A burst of plasma fire from a Thraxian soldier tore through the van's windshield, shattering glass into 1,000 glinting shards. Sergeant Adams and the medic exchanged glances, their expressions shifting to mounting horror as the grim reality set in. The breacher wasn't going to make it out alive. Smoke began to billow from the jagged remnants of the windshield, and the minivan, now a crippled hulk, started drifting away from its intended target, the precious explosives inside rendered useless. Adam's fists clenched tightly, frustration boiling within him as he helplessly watched their last chance at stopping the mech slip away, second by agonizing second. SWAT 1 on scene. I am 10 to 42. The driver of the armored MATV's voice crackled over the radio, cutting through the panic. Then, the distinctive rumble of a diesel engine sliced through the chaos of battle like a knife. The armored MATV burst from a side street, its imposing frame slamming into the side of the minivan with a bone-jarring force. The impact sent the vehicle careening directly toward the mech's enormous legs. Metal screamed against metal as the two vehicles collided with the war machine's base, a cacophony of destruction ringing out. The resulting explosion lit up the battlefield like a miniature sun, illuminating the night for a brief moment before darkness reclaimed it. The shockwaves surged outward, forcefully knocking Adams off his feet, his ears ringing from the thunderous blast. His body crumpled against the side of a nearby bus, the medic tumbling down beside him, both men momentarily disoriented as the world around them faded into chaos. Everything went black. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, a deafening, oppressive void that seemed to stretch on forever. Then, slowly, the world came back into focus. The ringing in Adam's ears faded, replaced by the distant crackle of flames and the groaning of twisted metal. His body ached, every muscle protesting as he pushed himself up from the ground. The medic lay beside him, groaning as he stirred, his face streaked with soot and blood. Adam's vision swam as he looked around. The battlefield was a wasteland of destruction. The minivan and the MATV were gone, reduced to smoldering wreckage. The mech, however, still stood, its massive frame partially obscured by the thick black smoke that billowed from the explosion. One of its legs was mangled, the hydraulics sparking and hissing as it struggled to maintain balance. The machine's red sensor arrays flickered, scanning the area with erratic movements. "Sarge?" the medic croaked, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "You okay?" Adams nodded, though his head throbbed with every movement. "Yeah. You?" The medic winced as he sat up, clutching his side. "I'll live. But we're not out of this yet." Adam's eyes darted to the mech. It was still operational, though clearly damaged. The plasma cannon on its right arm was offline, the barrel glowing red-hot and smoking. But the left arm's energy shield still pulsed with blue light, deflecting the occasional stray shot from the remaining Thraxian soldiers. "We need to finish this," Adams muttered, his voice low and determined. He grabbed his rifle, checking the magazine. Half empty. He didn't have many shots left. The medic nodded, pulling a sidearm from his holster. "What's the plan?" Adams hesitated, his mind racing. The breacher sacrifice had bought them a chance, but the mech was still a threat. And with their numbers dwindling, they couldn't afford another direct assault. "We hit it where it's weak," Adams said finally. "That leg's barely holding on. If we can take it out completely, the whole thing might come down." The medic's eyes widened. "You're talking about getting close to that thing? Do you have a better idea?" Adams snapped, his patience wearing thin. The medic shook his head. "No. But if we're doing this, we're doing it together." Adams nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Let's move." The two men crept through the battlefield, using the wreckage as cover. The Thraxian soldiers were scattered, their ranks thinned by the explosion and the relentless fire from Adam's squad. But the mech was still the biggest threat, its massive frame casting a shadow over the entire street. As they approached, the mech's sensors locked onto them. Its head swiveled with a mechanical whine, the red glow of its eyes piercing through the smoke. The energy shield on its left arm flared to life, deflecting a burst of gunfire from Adam's rifle. "Keep it distracted," Adams shouted, ducking behind an overturned car. The medic nodded, firing his sidearm at the mech's head. The shots pinged harmlessly off its armor, but it was enough to draw its attention. Adams took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. He sprinted from cover, his boots pounding against the pavement as he closed the distance to the mech. The machine's sensors tracked him, but its movements were sluggish, the damage to its legs slowing it down. He reached the base of the mech, his eyes locking onto the mangled leg. The hydraulics were sparking, the metal twisted and warped from the explosion. Adams raised his rifle, aiming for the weakest point. "Come on, you bastard," he muttered, squeezing the trigger. The shots tore through the damaged hydraulics, sending sparks flying. The mech shuddered, its massive frame tilting precariously. Adams emptied the rest of his magazine into the leg, the metal groaning under the strain. "It's going down!" the medic shouted, his voice filled with a mix of hope and fear. The mech's leg gave out with a deafening crash, the massive machine toppling to the ground. The impact shook the street, sending debris flying in all directions. Adams dove for cover, his ears ringing from the noise. For a moment there was silence. Then the mech systems began to fail, the red glow of its sensors flickering before going dark. The energy shield on its left arm sputtered and died, the blue light fading away. Adams let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "It's over." The medic emerged from cover, his sidearm still raised as he approached the fallen mech. "You sure about that?" Adams nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on the machine. "Yeah, it's done." The two men stood there for a moment, the weight of what they'd just accomplished settling over them. The mech, once an unstoppable force, now lay broken and lifeless. The Thraxian soldiers, their morale shattered by the loss of their war machine, began to retreat, their movements frantic and disorganized. Adams turned to the medic, a tired smile on his face. "We did it." The medic nodded, though his expression was grim. "Yeah, but at what cost?" Adams' smile faded as he looked around the battlefield. The bodies of his squadmates lay scattered among the wreckage, their sacrifices etched into the very ground they'd fought to protect. The breacher, the bearded officer, the others, they were gone. But their actions had turned the tide, giving the survivors a chance to regroup and fight another day. "We'll honor them," Adams said finally, his voice steady. "We'll make sure their sacrifices weren't in vain." The medic nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "Let's finish this." As the sun began to rise over the battlefield, Adams and the medic moved to regroup with the remaining members of their squad. The fight was far from over, but for now, they had won a crucial victory. And as long as they stood together, they would continue to fight, for their fallen comrades, for their city, and for the future they refused to let the Thraxians take away.